Europe is currently facing a multifaceted crisis fueled by Donald Trump's commercial threats and ongoing disruptions to Russian gas supplies due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. As Trump demands increased purchases of US oil and gas, European nations are grappling with the potential impact of tariffs and the renewed independence on Russian energy. Dependence again, not independence. This precarious situation threatens not only economic stability, but also worsens inflation and complicates energy security, leaving European leaders at a crossroads. Today, we examine the implications of these commercial threats, the resurgence of reliance on Russian gas, and the strategies Europe is adopting to navigate this complex crisis. Welcome to In Depth. Politico has reported that Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has threatened retaliatory measures against Ukraine if Kiev halts Russian gas transit to Slovakia in January. Ukrainian President Zelensky has responded by announcing that Ukraine will not extend its gas transit agreement with Russia, accusing Fico of indirectly supporting Putin through gas purchases. In response, Fico warned that Slovakia could stop supplying electricity to Ukraine if necessary, emphasizing the potential impact to energy prices in Slovakia and the EU. He also criticized Zelensky, accusing him of indifference to Slovakia's energy security. Slovakia and Hungary, both led by Russian-friendly leaders, have urged Ukraine to renew the gas transit deal, fearing supply disruptions. Fico's pro-Putin stance has sparked tensions with Kiev and European allies. European gas prices surged by more than 2%, reaching 47 euros per megawatt hour after Vladimir Putin announced that Russia would not renew a key gas transit deal with Ukraine, set to expire at the end of the year. The Telegraph reported that the pipeline supplying countries such as Slovakia, Hungary and Austria will no longer be used for gas exports to Europe. Despite the ongoing war, Russia has continued gas shipments via this route, generating billions in revenue. However, Ukraine has refused to renew the deal unless Russia is denied payments until after the war, leaving Europe dependent on already constrained alternative routes such as the Turk Stream. Gazprom, facing significant losses, is severely impacted by the collapse of its EU gas markets. And for more analysis, we are joined by Peter Roff, a writer at Newsweek magazine from Washington, and Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist from Cairo. A very warm welcome to the show. Mr. Roff.
Hello, good to be with you.
Sir, how do Trump's tariff threats impact the overall economic stability of the European Union?
I think it's problematic. It's something that's going to have to be worked out. But as everyone should know by now, everything with President Donald Trump is a negotiation. Ordering breakfast with President Donald Trump is a negotiation. His tough talk now on tariffs is just as much about getting Europeans or the Chinese or other U.S. trading partners to lower the tariffs that they impose on goods coming from the United States as they are about generating revenue or protecting U.S. industry.
Okay, Mr. Osman, how do you evaluate the future of dynamic of relations between the United States and Europe with Trump returning to the White House?
Thank you, Rana, for having me.
It's my pleasure, sir.
You're most welcome. The European Union is bracing for the return of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an open Eurosceptic, and this is no secret. He has expressed his skepticism over the entire European Union as an entity openly before becoming president, and when he became president, and when he left office. So this is no secret. And I think Donald Trump prefers to engage European countries rather bilaterally, on a bilateral basis, and he enjoys a very problematic relationship with many existing European powerhouses, primarily Germany, of course, and France. But the current socialist German government of Olaf Scholz, which of course is currently in dire straits and is heading for a snap election, does not enjoy a very good relationship with someone with that administration, like that of Donald Trump. And the same, of course, goes with Emmanuel Macron when Trump was president. But both leaders had a very problematic relationship. And I think now central to European American disagreements and maybe even tensions in the coming weeks and months will be the Ukraine issue. With Trump's keenness on disengagement from the Ukrainian conflict and undermining the U.S. commitment to NATO and to supporting Ukraine. That's what he pledged.
Yes, he did pledge so.
Yeah, so it will be a very problematic relationship from then onwards.
Dr. Mohammed, do you see it problematic as that Donald Trump is ready to reach a settlement on this war and end it, or do you see things are going to be escalating? What's your narrative on this, sir?
I think Trump is keen on reaching or imposing a certain settlement in the Russo-Ukrainian war. However, whether he will be able to do that remains to be tested, because the problem is not with Ukraine. Ukraine, at the end of the day, will submit to the will of the United States as the biggest provider of arms and aid, and the European Union will most likely, and the rest of NATO, of course, will most likely follow suit in such a settlement that might even be part of a settlement. However, it will be rather challenging to convince the Russians to give any concessions, because the Russians will have a huge set of demands.
Even, sir, if relations between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President-elect Donald Trump are going to be a good relations?
You see, it's irrelevant, and as Mr. Ruff said, or basically implied, that Donald Trump is a very Mr. Ruff, I'm sorry, is a very, very unpredictable character, and it doesn't mean, and a personal relationship between him and Trump will not determine the trajectory of the geopolitical tensions between Russia and the collective West. I think it's not that simple. And of course, however, I do believe that there are high chances that we will see a settlement in Ukraine within the year 2025, I mean. And I don't think it will be favorable to the terms of either Ukraine or European countries.
Mr. Ruff, how does the current energy crisis influenced by the Russia-Ukraine conflict intersect with Trump's trade demands, sir?
I'm not sure it does. We're in the middle of a global oil glut. We have more oil globally than we need. The price is coming down. That's damaging Putin. Trump knows this. Trump's energy team is going to expand the opportunities to explore for fossil energy in areas that the Biden administration tried to declare off limits, which may bring the price down even lower. I mean, you can't sell oil for less than it costs to pull out of the ground. I mean, not over an extended period. That hurts the Russians. It hurts Putin's ability to get cash to fund his war. I think that's why Putin wants to end it. I think that Trump senses this, and while I didn't mean to imply that I think Trump is unpredictable, I think he is, in fact, highly predictable. Even his
What you said,
unpredictability
sir,
is
was that you need, even if you need to take breakfast with Donald Trump, then you need to negotiate everything
but
with
it is,
Donald Trump. I remember
and
your words very well.
that is, yes, and that is predictable. That everything is a negotiation, and
So you
Trump,
meant he's predictable.
he is, in that sense, yes, he is predictable. Everything is a negotiation, and it doesn't matter if you are politically on the same side as Trump or you are politically opposed to Trump. If he's sitting across the table from you, he's going to negotiate out what he thinks is the best deal for him. And in this case, that now means the best deal for the United States. That may mean tariffs. That may mean tariffs as a threat to get the European Union, the Chinese, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Canadians, the Mexicans to drop their tariffs. We'll see where it goes.
Sir, if you want to see where it goes, do you read it as Donald Trump will do for the sake of the United States, whatever it takes for the sake of the United States and only the United States, as a businessman and as the President of the United States?
I think that he regards the economic health and national security of the United States as his primary concern and responsibility. And so in that context, I think the answer is probably yes. I think that there are other people in the Trump movement who think that tariffs are an attractive way to buy down corporate and personal taxes on income. That's not necessarily the approach that I favor, but there are a lot of people out there who think that the Chinese pay the tariffs, so let the Chinese pay and cut the tax rates for working Americans and American families. I'm not sure it works out that way, but that's what his political constituency thinks, and the fact that they think it makes it important.
Okay, Mr. Osman, can you discuss the potential for EU fragmentation in response to differing impacts of tariffs among member states?
Probably, I wouldn't go as far as fragmentation. However, it will adversely affect European unity because the European Union is already suffering from a form of disunity at the moment, with the rise of certain governments, for example, that would advocate more protectionist Slovakia, or before that, way ago, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and other players. I think this is the main effect on internal European unity. And in confronting tariffs, however, by the United States, if the United States decides to slap tariffs, collective tariffs, selectively on countries that, however, even if it is imposed selectively, it is a free trade area. It's a common market, so it's really hard to see these tariffs not affecting everyone. And if anything, the U.S. economy on the long term, because the United States economic supremacy is based completely on the globalized economic model that the world is functioning within at the moment. So if the United States decides to part ways with this economic model and dismantle it, basically, or start dismantling it, it will deprive the U.S. of its main main model it functions through. It might buy them some very short-term benefits, like the relocation of certain industries or the nationalization of certain industries, meaning that they would be that they will go back and invest in the United States, for example, or encourage them to invest in the United States, for example. However, that will not be feasible on the long term, because basically the US does not have as cheap labor in the United States, and natural resources are not as cheap as they are, for example, in many other parts of the world.
Okay, Mr. Rauf, Mr. Mohammed, also, before we continue, let's take a moment to watch a report titled Europe Under Siege, Navigating Trump's Tariffs and the Russian Gas Crisis.
The geopolitical landscape in Europe is growing increasingly complex, shaped by Donald Trump's tariff threats and the ongoing Russian gas crisis. President-elect Trump has warned the European Union to significantly increase its imports of US oil and gas to reduce substantial trade deficit or face steep tariffs on goods exported to the United States. This ultimatum has alarmed European leaders, who are already dealing with political instability and the lack of a unified strategy to address potential trade conflicts. At the same time, Europe is grappling with a severe energy crisis worsened by its dependence on Russian gas. Following the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Europe has diversified its energy sources, leading to a substantial rise in liquefied natural gas (LNG) imports from the US, which now account for nearly half of its total LNG supply. However, this growing reliance poses risks, as Trump administration may use LNG exports as leverage in trade negotiations, potentially driving up prices and creating economic strain across the continent. The combined pressures of Trump's tariff threats and Europe's precarious energy situation highlight the urgent need for the EU to reassess its energy security strategies. Economists warn that the escalating trade tensions could impede economic recovery efforts post-pandemic. Meanwhile, the EU faces the challenge of balancing immediate energy demands with long-term goals of reducing the fossil fuel dependency. As Europe navigates these challenges, its response will play a pivotal role in shaping future transatlantic relations and ensuring economic stability.
We're back again, Mr. Rauf. What strategies should European countries adopt to diversify their trade relations and reduce dependency on the United States markets? And of course, I wanted to comment on Dr. Mohammed Osman. I wanted you to comment on the narrative of Dr. Mohammed Osman. If you still recall what he said, it's okay. If you don't, let's answer this question.
Well, I'm not sure I want them to reduce their economic dependence on the United States. I'd like the Europeans to relax the tariffs that they have on American exports so that we can reduce tariffs or not impose tariffs on imports from Europe. Remember, the creation of a united Europe was based on the idea of a free trade zone. It wasn't for political reasons, it wasn't for military reasons, it was for economic reasons. And it worked very well, and it helped Europe recover more quickly from the ravages of the Second World War than it might otherwise have done. But the problem that I think has developed and what we've seen is the unhappiness of the dictates coming out of Brussels that impinge upon decisions that should be made by the sovereign entities that are the nations of United Europe. It's what drove the Brits out during Brexit, is they simply got tired of being told what they could call a sausage and what kind of tomatoes they could sell at farmers markets and when. I think that's an opportunity for the U.S., and there ought to be a U.S.-Great Britain, U.S.-UK free trade agreement that ought to be on the top of the agenda for Keir Starmer and Donald Trump come January 2025 when Trump becomes president. I think that overall, as was said, I think that the idea that America can become the global manufacturing headquarters as it was in the post-war period is a fantasy. the idea that the American
You said
manufacturing
it's a fantasy, sir?
I'm sorry. The fact that the U.S. will dominate the world in manufacturing and lead it as it did in the 1950s and the 60s after World War II, I do think is a fantasy. I don't think that ever comes back. I do think that in new industries, in AI, in the creation of hardware and content for the global communications revolution, America can take the lead there. America can take the lead in automation. There are lots of things that can be done. America is a place to do business. And I think that the Trump deregulatory and tax reduction agenda, changing things on the supply side of the economy rather than on the demand side of the economy, will make American manufacturing more viable. The idea that we can compete with the Vietnamese or the Cambodians or the Chinese on the assembly of sneakers by paying, $1.25 an hour, that's not going to happen.
Mr. Ruff, I'll be back again to you to ask you what do you see that's missing, or where's the vacuum for all you said to be implemented? Mr. Osman, what are the implications of a potential reduction in U.S. military presence in Europe for NATO and European defense initiatives, sir?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, sir. What are the implications of a potential reduction in U.S. military presence in Europe for NATO and European defense initiatives?
Of course, any reduction of U.S. commitment to NATO is quite detrimental to the viability of NATO as a military alliance, basically, because the United States possesses the largest military force, the strongest military force in the world, and of course the strongest military force inside NATO. And of course, the United States has committed hundreds of thousands of troops to NATO. About 300,000 American troops are deployed in Europe. And of course, 300,000 NATO troops, and these troops basically they set the balance of power between the West and Russia in the European context, and of course this tilts it to the favor of the West. So any reduction of US commitment will be a disaster. As we have seen in the Russo-Ukrainian war, the main arms that were supplied to Ukraine so that it can be able to last for this long and this very long war of attrition were basically US weapons and munitions, especially artillery munitions, for example. However, European militaries are small. The production capacity, the military industrial complex of most European countries is minute in comparison to the United States, and their defense spending also vis-a-vis their GDP is quite small relatively. So of course, any reduction will cause a crisis that could be even existential to NATO. And I think that Trump has made it clear that the European countries have to he upped the ante, basically telling them now, not only do you have to spend 3% of your GDP on defense, now it has to be 5%. He hinted that very recently. And of course, for them to expand their military spending in this manner will have quite the impact on their already strained economies on account of the economic crisis caused by partially by the Russo-Ukrainian war and the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so Mr. Ruff, because I have to wrap up this episode now. In 10 seconds, what are the potential consequences for European foreign policy if the United States continues to exert economic pressure on its allies? Or Donald Trump, in other words?
Well, I think that what Trump is saying about military spending is that NATO can't be more important to Europe than it is to the United States. It has to be equally important. In terms of economics, Europe is a market, America is a market. We want access to their market, they want access to ours. If they won't play fair, we won't play fair. If they'll play fair, America will play fair.
Sir, are you optimistic?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was Peter Roth, a writer at Newsweek magazine, and Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist. Thank you for your insights and your valuable knowledge. That brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Q News, and stay tuned.